Hello, everyone. Yes, it is here. It is official. It is time for the Creative Outlet Podcast episode number 5. I am your host today, the one and out of three, as far as I'm aware, because I've actually looked it up, Brandon Pudwill. And today is August 12th, 2020. Obviously, it's been a long time since episode uh, 4 has been recorded, but we're going to be talking about that a little bit later because it's going to be more important to a focal point of this here introduction here that I will be doing today on this good old COP, no longer the cop, you could say, for specific reasons. Let's see. What do we want to talk about in this here intro today? Let's start with something that I try to do in every episode. I try to do some reflections from the last episode. So I was looking. I remember editing episode 4 a while back now, which again I'm gonna be talking about in probably just a minute or two here. And one of the things I talked about in episode 4 was my poor experiences trying to game online while I was at college. And one thing that I didn't really justify very well in it was why it was an issue, because I think a lot of people can just kind of assume, well, out of all the issues that you could really have going into higher education, is that really the biggest one? And, I can agree with that since I didn't justify it very well. But one thing that I think, like my main reason why you would want to even talk about it would be, what do you do when you have downtime, right? Because when you're in college, it's not supposed to be just about going to class, going and studying, right? And of course, that's people should go out to the community and do things while they're out and around and hang out, right? It's also just good to have something that's fun to do while you're, by yourself, right? It's really that simple. I need something to do when I'm alone, and it's not like I can't get enjoyment out of playing a single player experience, but playing online, in my opinion, when it comes to something that is multiplayer, is just infinitely more fun. Let's see. I'm going to skip over this because I want to talk about a quick newsy thing that should hopefully get into why this is going so late. So, full disclosure, this is the second time I've tried recording this. The first time I tried recording this was with a guest, and we actually got pretty far into this. So, for example, in what I was just talking about with that reflection, I still feel like it's important to get that out there. But there's probably going to be some retreading from that work that I've done in the past. And you may be wondering right now, well, why would that be the case? Well, it's because of you're probably watching this after viewing my upload of what will be the first ever Creative Outlet bonus. So, we probably, my guest and I probably put about, 2 hours into trying to do this episode 5 the first time. And we both agreed that we don't want that to go to waste. But for separate personal reasons, we won't be finishing that draft of that episode, which is why I'm here right now. But suffice to say, that will be going up, and it's going to be like the first 2 topics. I still want to discuss them here, especially because one of them has some pretty important updates that I want to go over that just really continue the thesis that I was talking about in it. Gosh, I don't even remember if we really got into the second topic now that I'm reading it. I'm pretty sure we did. But it's even more relevant right now with this particular date and time and more things that I've read about since then. So regardless, I still want to go over these things on here. But just so you're aware, that is going to come out before this, for sure. Uh, so in a sense, I suppose it's a little silly for me to be warning about this right now. I don't know, I might change my mind and release it afterward just because I want to get this completely edited and put together. It's still kind of fluid right now in my plans. Uh, but for that little creative outlet bonus episode, I'm just gonna try to do something really simple with it, not even really bother with a bunch of like, B-roll pictures, video, all that sort of stuff. Just kind of put it together in a nice sequence. Put a little intro and outro stuff at the end. Plus, we had some great fun filming issues along the way in terms of making this here video version come to life. So that's always fun. So if I can just make that simpler when really what I want to be working on is this main 5th episode and finally being able to move on after this to episode 6, that would be ideal. So in terms of quick newsy things that I wanted to discuss in this here intro, there's this little thing going around called, COVID-19. Right. That is the current, as of this date, year 2020, global pandemic going around. So there's a lot to unpack with that. I don't want to really go super duper in depth because I'm sure that you've heard a ton about it already, especially at this point. It's there's only really 3 countries right now that are continuing to do poorly with COVID-19, which are India, Brazil, and wouldn't you know it, the United States of America. Whereas a bunch of other countries are definitely dealing with the situation a good bit better, but we're still seeing some issues globally in terms of things like trying to get education back up and running. But don't worry, I'm going to be talking about that sooner than later. So, just keep in mind some best practices in general when it comes to this pandemic. Wear a mask when you go out into public, period. No questions, just do it unless you have a genuine, real good reason not to. You should really try to wear this sort of thing. I mean, there was a study from, let's see, this is probably from June at this point. I was talking about how masks could crush the 2nd and 3rd potential waves of COVID-19. Of course, right now, we're already in the middle of that. Even when it comes to doing things like going into the real world and shopping. If you go to a fun fact, when I'm at home here like I am right now, I work at a good old-fashioned retail grocery establishment. Because, gotta make money when you're 19 now, as of yesterday, 20 years of age. How exciting. There's certain practices that you should do that will be very important, that people just, they're things that would typically not be on their mind, even if they were sick with something like a cold, right? So, for example, something that people like to do a lot when they're buying, produce, for example, let's pretend my mouse here was actually, in reality, an avocado, right? They like to go around and pick it up and, look around at all the angles and make sure it's not bruised. And I totally get why people do that, right? But we have to assume in general that everybody is sick, right? So we don't want you taking this mouse avocado off of the rack and putting it back, because now you may have gone ahead and spread the disease to all the rest of those avocados mouse avocados, and now you're going to get a bunch of people sick. So try, for example, if you're going to take something, take it. Or, be sure you know what you want, right? Because we're trying to, that you don't want to have to bring things back, because then you're just potentially bringing disease back into the store, right? Let's see, what are some other things? Yeah, or try to use wipes and sprays and stuff if you're gonna get a cart. I remember this is like months ago at this point. This is like back in May. One thing that my employer was doing was we were having people, or no, we were having like there's usually a kid that has to go out and like grab all of the carts and bring them inside, and we were having him or her spray down the carts themselves, right? And I remember somebody, because I was doing it at one point, right? And somebody saying to me, "Aren't you going to be so glad when you don't have to do that anymore?" And I remember thinking to myself, no, I actually really hope that this becomes like a standard practice because, if anything, it just keeps people cleaner and more sanitized. And isn't that what we want for the world, especially in a, I don't mean this is pejorative in terms of other societies, but as a civilized society, isn't that something that we want to have? So yeah, I mean, even when this is done, this is still just a best practice in general, is to try to keep whatever you're using clean and sanitized, right? How about like just basically going to work? The big one, just wear a mask. It's that simple. If you're sick, stay home. You do it like, I mean, it's especially hard because like I think about back in March when this all had started in April and even going on, right? Where a bunch of businesses had to temporarily, and some now, unfortunately, like there's up to like 40% of small businesses could be closing at the end of the year because of this global pandemic. Or I should say 40% of American small businesses, just to be clear, which is extremely unfortunate, right? Uh, but if you are sick, it is more important that you are not there and getting other people sick. Although I totally, like, that's why it's important to have something like a strong social safety net so that you can feel that sense of comfort and that you don't have to feel like you have to go to work. But that's a whole bigger discussion I don't have time for at the moment. And of course, we can, there's a lot of like shoulds and how things I think should be that would have to go into it as opposed to how they are at the moment. But I digress from that conversation. And I'd say if you really want a good reason for why that is I mean, it just comes down to contact tracing, right? If you don't know what contact tracing is, think of it almost it's like a family tree, but instead of it being family, it's all of the potential people you could get sick, right? So, maybe you've got person A up here who is sick, who gets it to you, and then now you have, for example, gone home, and that means you could have spread it to your partner, your kids, and then, if you go back into the real world, there's all these other people you could spread it to. So if you are sick, the whole idea is to try to stop the contact right there instead of having to trace it out to a bunch of other people. And I feel like that's an appropriate segue into talking about why this took so long to come out. So first there was that first attempt at doing this, right? And this was probably mid-July. I'll basically say the exact date in that bonus episode there, right? And just because of like certain family stuff, I basically have to, well, hopefully I won't have to anymore, but we'll figure that out. Switch between houses every week, or at least, help my sibling get between there, and inevitably that means I end up there, right? And so, one of my parents, whom I was with at the time, one of their coworkers felt sick. So, he did the right thing, went and got a test. And just another word of warning, I guess, when it comes to doing COVID-19 related things. If you are sick and you have to get a test, just please go to your doctor for it. Don't go to somewhere like this guy. He went to the local CVS for the test. And he didn't get his results until like 3 weeks later when, guess what? It doesn't really matter anyway because you're pretty much done being infected after 2 weeks. Wah, wah, wah. And then, of course, so we had one person get infected, potentially. Then there was a second person who was sick. And then there was a third. Now, these second and third people fortunately received negative results. And then there was, like, my other parent and my sibling had to go out to this graduation party for my cousin. And then my uncle got sick and he tested positive. And it's been a whole mess. But the short version of the story is because people keep getting sick, I haven't been able to come here and just spend, 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, however long it's going to take, recording this. And that is ridiculous. That's a super benign example of the far-reaching effects that this can have. But, there are people who, like I said, if you go out and you are sick and you can't go into work, well, then that means if you got someone else sick, they shouldn't be able to go into work, and then if they get other people sick because they were going in when they didn't know that they were sick, then a whole bunch of other people got sick, and there's lost wages, lost jobs. There's a big sort of collateral damage situation going on here. You see what I'm saying? And again, I feel very fortunate in that this is like a super benign, not in the grand scheme of things, not all that important example of the bad things that can come from doing this, or from not being responsible with this situation. And I was just trying to be responsible and not leaving the house unless I absolutely positively had to. If it was like I needed to eat something, or I had to work, in which case I made sure before I started going in, right, to let them know, hey, this thing has happened, just so you're aware. I want to know what you think before I just say I don't think I should go. And, fortunately everything's turned out fine so far, but things could have been very bad, and that's ultimately what we're trying to prevent, is this could happen, which would be very bad for a lot of people, situation, right? And then we get into things like there's a whole bunch of conspiracies going around about doing things like wearing masks. Like there was one a while back, are masks causing pleurisy? No, they're not causing pleurisy. Is it harder to breathe? Sure, it's harder to breathe, but it really depends on what underlying conditions you have in terms of how bad an experience that would be. Like if you were a lifelong smoker, or you have terrible asthma or allergies, yeah, maybe you might want to see if you can get a genuine exemption from wearing a mask. But by and large, they're doing a lot better than they are good, especially because there's a lot more studies coming out now about, like, what are the proper types of masks to be wearing? And wouldn't you know it, it's the ones with, more layers of protection, as opposed to even just your basic doctor's mask isn't as effective. Even though it still works. It's more effective than not wearing anything at all. But it still could be, you could still be wearing something better. And of course, now that we're in months and months of doing this, and there's a presidential election in November, it's become super politicized, so I'm going to have pretty much any non-science believing individual coming after me for this if they happen to see it. But I'm sorry, it is what it is. I'm gonna tell you like it is, and the science does not lie. Even if, someone like Dr. Fauci at the start, right? Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's one of the leaders of the coronavirus COVID-19 task force for the United States, right? Was talking about how you shouldn't be wearing masks because they don't work, which is an absolutely idiotic thing to say, because as he came out later and admitted, well, it's really because we didn't want people buying, like, the high-quality N95 level masks that we needed for our first responders and the like, which, you could have just said that the first time and everything would have been fine. But I digress. Really, I think the biggest question people have for this is, like, do I have to stay home only with my family? Does life have to be completely 100% abnormal? And I would say no. It does not have to be totally abnormal. As long as you're being responsible about it, right? You can still go to the store. Heck, you can still go to like a fun store, right? If you're like me and you want to go to the local game shop, you can still do that, just as long as you're doing these responsible things like wearing a mask, washing your hands frequently, putting on hand sanitizer. Um, if you like in my case, I don't. My guest was my girlfriend. I can still go see her as long as we're both doing these healthy things and are not sick, right? It's not like life has to be 100% abnormal, but you have to be responsible about it. And ultimately, being responsible about it means looking at this in the most conservative way that you feel is comfortable, right? So, a greater example is like, should I go to a baseball game? No. Should I let my kid play this sport right now? No, you probably should not do that. As much as that sucks, and that's not, it's not something that we want to have going on, if you want to be safe, there are going to have to be some sacrifices. Should I go to a restaurant? Well, first, it really depends on what level of safety practices are being done there. I have decided that I'm pretty much not going to a restaurant for the rest of 2020 and potentially some of 2021. But certainly go ahead and order as much delivery, takeout, whatever you can, because it's not, your local restaurants still need that money. It's just that it's not necessarily safe to have people inside of that establishment at the moment. So that's ultimately going to be most of my spiel on COVID-19. There's one major facet of this that I haven't discussed, but that's because it's going to be one of our main topics in this episode, right? And I just feel like it's such a big topic that it's worth giving its own large portion of time to. Now, obviously, as an American, I tend to focus a bit more on what has been happening in the United States. So another major incident that happened, at this point, again, it's pretty older news, but it's still an important thing to touch on, was the George Floyd incident and just the general bit of police brutality going on around the United States. You have other people like Breonna Taylor is the other main victim that comes to my mind at the moment, and I'm not exactly the best equipped person to talk about this, considering I am, a white male of relative upper middle class status. But it's still a very pressing topic that's worth thinking about, right? It's not just because I have that status doesn't mean I don't have valid opinions to give on it. So, I figure by this point most people know what's going on. Again, this and what I just discussed about COVID-19 are going to be available in the Creative Outlet bonus, because a lot of, definitely doing some retreading here, but again, it's fine to get this stuff out. But the long story short is that a Minneapolis police officer kneeled on Mr. George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, which is absolutely ridiculous, despicable, inhumane behavior. Not to mention unprofessional, because an officer is supposed to serve and protect, not offensively attack a non-violent individual, right? And in terms of the response, right, well, we can separate protesters and rioters when we think about this, especially because for the most part there hasn't really been any rioting since like the very start of these protests, and since then it's been pretty banal minor protests, right? And I have no love for those people who did rioting, especially because, like I said, up to 40% of small businesses could be closing by the year's end in the U.S. But the peaceful protesters are acting in their rights. They have that constitutional right in the United States. And it's unfortunate that we have to have all of these people gathering in the middle of a pandemic. And I certainly would not go do that because, well, like I just said, we have a global pandemic. But if there was any reason to be outside and in a group, I would consider protesting injustices to be a valid reason. especially because now the federal government has had significantly worse and worse reactions over time. Like there were just federal agents sent out to Portland, Oregon, when the governor didn't want that. I don't know if it happened or if something got worked out, but federal agents were planned to be sent to more cities, including Milwaukee in my very own home state of Wisconsin, which would be very, very upsetting. Uh, but and you had people in these federal agents were in unmarked vans, just taking people away, right? That's plain Jane illegal. And I get that you don't want something like traffic being stopped because people are protesting, right? But ultimately, it is their right to do so. It just is what it is. And and you can look at separate things like the police response by itself, right? And their response is just as aberrant because in response to these protests of police brutality, you see more police brutality doing things like tear gassing peaceful protesters, which, just as a side note, any chemical weapon like tear gas is illegal under the Geneva Convention. So that's like international law that for some reason doesn't apply to this smaller individual country, right? There was a video of an officer who shoved an old man to the ground in Buffalo, New York, and he was bleeding out of his ear afterward. Fortunately, the old man did live, right? But the fact that happened in the first place is beyond the pale, right? So, obviously, a big question is, what should we be doing about it, right? I'm not a policymaker. I would love to be one day. That would be a great job, in my opinion. But I could still make recommendations, and the reforms are pretty obvious. And if you just want a clear, simple list, go look at Campaign Zero's website, because they have an excellent, comprehensive list with more ideas than I just want to give right now. And again, these are kind of retreading things that I'm saying in the creative outlet bonus. But I think the two big ones are enforcing wearing body cameras at all times so you can get clear evidence of what actually went on if an officer's life was threatened, or if he was just doing something that would be that was killing somebody unjustly, right? And then you have to have a penalty for turning them off, because obviously if you have it off, that means you're probably doing something that would be majorly illegal and unethical. And I'd say the second major idea isn't something that Campaign Zero has listed, but it's something that, when you think about it, it seems like a, duh, why didn't I think of that before? Which would be a sort of a police the police law, because one of the major issues in this George Floyd incident was the fact that there were many other officers surrounding the person who was kneeling on his neck, not doing anything. And that's absolutely insane. So the idea of this law would be saying, okay, so obviously the guy who kneeled on his neck should be prosecuted for some level of murder. I don't know. I don't know the law specifically, so I can't give any recommendation on what his charge should be. But regardless, he should get some sort of level of murder, and so should all of those officers who aren't stopping him from doing what he was doing, right? And yeah, admittedly, I do have to give credit to my favorite progressive commentator, Mr. Kyle Kalinske, who I've mentioned, I believe, on the first episode of this show, for bringing these reforms to my attention. And I guess the last, or I'm pretty sure this is the last sort of thing I want to discuss here, is, so one tactic that a message that a lot of protesters have talked about is this idea of defund the police. And it's something that a lot of protesters called on the Minneapolis mayor to do. And, let's just put it out there. Do I agree with actually defunding the police in its entirety? No. Because we need some sort of enforcement for our laws, right? But what I do agree with is two things. One, the way that it's being used as a message, right? Because this is the same strategy that politicians should be using against members of the other party or other parties in their lawmaking chamber, right? You have to propose an idea that is way beyond what you actually want to get so that you can meet somewhere in the middle, right? Because what's in the middle is probably what you actually want and is going to make you happy. And healthcare in the American context is a great example of that, right? If any left-leaning politicians call for an NHS style, and more specifically, probably more like an NHS Scotland style system, because the NHS, the National Health Service in England itself, has some of its own issues, but I hear Scotland is a much more simplified system. But the point is public funding of public health institutions, right? The right-leaning politicians can come back and counter with a right now, the system of the individual mandate, which was their idea in the 90s, which is what Obamacare just is, but I digress from that conversation. It's not important right now. And then you can keep countering until maybe you end up with a French or Canadian style system where you have public funds going to private institutions, which is still a good solution because then you ultimately get everybody healthcare in the United States, right? So that's a great comparison with it, because the idea is that, well, defund the police, if you were to assume that means getting rid of all police funding, that seems super extreme and there's nobody who would really be in support of it. So then you have to have the other side of the conversation come back and say, well, maybe we'll do these like the reforms that I just talked about. We'll do a police the police law so that hopefully any other officers that are around can prevent any unjustified killings. It's not going to stop it completely, because what are you going to do when you have only one officer who's committing something with no one else around, right? But it should still prevent quite a few unjust deaths, right? And then the other part of it is in terms of what a lot of people actually mean when they say defund the police, which is in American society, a lot of money is given to police forces to do services that they aren't really equipped to handle. So, for example, the police will be called to settle certain mental health crises. So why would you send an individual with a gun to help somebody who is having some sort of mental breakdown where they might be like, lashing out and swinging their arms all over the place, or the police officer is going to feel threatened to potentially shoot them? Wouldn't you rather send a professional mental health counselor to that person? Like a social worker of some kind? That just makes more sense. So why put that money toward police funding and have them go do that job that they're not equipped for, when you could instead take some of that and put it more towards social work, which is a job that that person is equipped for? That's a basic idea. That's just one such example of it. Or putting more money toward education and actually setting up, instead of forcing police officers to go into schools and have security guards as opposed to resource officers that are actual members of the police force in a school. That's the idea, right? And I suppose the last thing I should discuss here, and again, this is also in the creative outlet bonus. I would be happy to have this out here twice. There is a Traitors to America list on oneangrygamer.net, which was a list of a whole bunch of different creators, independent corporations, and otherwise, that are basically calling for justice of some kind. And actually, I suppose I want to make another tangent off that quick, because there's something in that I didn't discuss. But the point is, I want to be on that list. I would consider a badge of honor, because there's a bunch of people on there who are just like, you see someone like, who is one of them? Oh, Review Tech USA is on the list, for example. He just does a bunch of commentary on game news, not unlike what I'm going to be doing here today in a sense as well. But just because he was like, hey, this thing that happened where an African-American individual was killed unjustly, and I think that's bad and we need to change laws. He is a traitor to America. Grr, how he's such a terrible person, right? Well, trust me, if that's all it takes to be a traitor to America and wanting to call for reform, for justice, I am more than happy to be on that list. Now, I did mention that some corporations are on that list, and I'm sure that there's probably, a couple that are doing some serious things. But in response to these protests, you've certainly seen some pretty overly woke things happening in response. So, for example, Hulu, the streaming service, took down an episode of The Golden Girls where they got mud face packs because that could totally be perceived as blackface. Because that's what people are calling for in response to this unjust shooting of an American citizen. Yes, please take down this episode of The Golden Girls. Or, there was Trader Joe's, right? They had a bunch of different other brands. I've never actually been into one, but this is just something that I heard about. Again, from my good favorite commentator, Mr. Kalinsky here. They had brands like, for their home brand stuff, they had Trader Jose's for their Hispanic foods, Trader Ming's for their East Asian foods. And there were people, including a high schooler, which I'm very disappointed in, protesting that these are very stereotypical names, so it gives a negative impact on these groups. So basically, Trader Joe's was pressured into just changing them all to Trader Joe's, right? But the problem with that, and Kyle fairly points this out in his video commentating on this, is that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? Because I could see if we were in an alternate reality where it already was the case that these were all Trader Joe's, there would definitely be people out there who are like, well, why aren't you representing these people with their proper name, like names from their home countries on these brands, right? Isn't that some cultural appropriation in taking this cuisine from another nation and not giving these people credit for it? So, then that cuts to, what do you actually want? What is more important here? Is it racist because you're using these fairly common names in these regions? Or is it more racist to culturally appropriate and not try to bring everybody together in a peaceful, sharing of cultures by having these options at all with some sort of name, right? Again, that's that damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of thing. Anyway, that should finish up this introduction here, other than introducing the topics that that I will be discussing today, I should say. I'm going to be starting with a review of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Again, check out the Creative Outlet bonus for a discussion between my guest and I on the game as well. I'm going to cover a bunch of the same points here, but hopefully I can expand upon it. And again, there's been some news since that recording that I think would be good to touch on. I'm going to be discussing, since I am a college student, whether or not students should be going back in the fall, which is very pertinent since that's tick-tock, tick-tock coming really soon here. Third, now that the whole slew of the 9th generation of consoles is coming, and in the case of the Nintendo Switch, already here, I want to give a roundup of what was seen during presentations on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, and see what the future holds for console gaming. Today I would like to discuss Super Smash Bros. Ultimate's first Character for Fighters Pass, Volume 2, Min Min from ARMS. And if you watch the Creative Outlet bonus, there's one extra topic that is mentioned in that intro that I won't be mentioning today, because I would like to have my guest, lady friend, and I come back and discuss that topic on our own, because it's a fairly controversial topic that we've discussed somewhat together outside of this podcast, and I think it would be better just in general to discuss it with her rather than just get my own opinion out there on it. So, with that all said and done, we're going to be getting into episode number 5 here of the Creative Outlet Podcast. All right, let's talk Animal Crossing New Horizons. Now I don't know how controversial, I apparently can't say it, my New Horizons direct preview was, uh, but I'm sure some of the things that I said in it will not be received super well now that I can finally release it. But I just want to put out there, regardless of any negative feelings I had based on the things that I'd seen coming out of New Horizons, I was still excited to play the game, right? And I'm totally fine coming here saying that I'm wrong about some of the things. So I'd still like to give a review of the game to here today, talking about things like the presentation. Every game has a story of some kind, but I feel like Animal Crossing New Horizons is better represented by the idea of a premise. I don't know if that's a sufficient delineation, but that's how I would describe it. Of course, I got to talk about new stuff, returning stuff, and then I have some big controversial questions to talk about here. So let's start with Animal Crossing New Horizons presentation. And that's talking about things like the art style, the resolution, frame rate, how the lighting looks, effects, music, all that sort of stuff here, right? And in my opinion, the art style is really just an expansion on what we saw in Animal Crossing New Leaf, right? It definitely looks a lot better than Animal Crossing New Leaf. If you just look at something like the resolution, even doing things like, if I remember correctly, it's 720p in handheld mode and 1080p in docked mode on the Switch. Honestly, I couldn't tell you the frame rate off the top of my head, but suffice it to say, the game runs smoothly, and it's not a super action-oriented game where you need specific timing on a lot of things other than maybe hitting your rocks for money and stones and ore and all that sort of stuff. So, it runs sufficiently, at least 30 frames fairly consistently. The game is cute in terms of the art style, right? It uses a lot of, basic rounded shapes, but it also tries to employ some realism in things like the effects when it comes to when you have a windy day. You'll be able to see basically each individual leaf on the tree that you have blowing around, right? And you'll see some realistic textures in terms of like things on the grass and your clothes, but they try to go. It's still a fairly cartoony game, and ultimately that type of art style is going to hold up in the long run as opposed to doing a super realistic game, because you don't have to worry about the level of detail because ultimately, like a game that came out that was in HD even 5 years ago on the early PS4 and the Xbox One isn't going to look as great today. Whereas Animal Crossing New Horizons is going to hold up for a good while. Although I wouldn't have minded if Nintendo had gone basically just with an up-resed Animal Crossing New Leaf, which is basically what they did for Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival on the Wii U. That game is still, as much as it's not a great game, it's still a pretty looking game, right? Looking at the music, the thing about Animal Crossing music is that there's very few actually catchy tracks, in my opinion, at least. Like, some of the KK songs are pretty catchy. The occasional walking around song is pretty catchy, like 8 p.m. in Animal Crossing New Leaf. Oh, I love that song. But for the most part, it's not, like, the music that I will experience when I'm just walking around isn't all too memorable. Looking at things like the sound effects, even the writing is pretty. Like again, it gets the job done, and there's a lot of personality that comes through each character in the writing. But when it comes to the characters, like they all have specific personality types. Each character doesn't have its own unique dialogue because oh my goodness, that would take way too long to write. So you'll see certain characters repeat a lot of dialogue over and over, and that gets a bit bothersome, in my opinion. The game's premise is something I want to talk about. So the whole idea of Animal Crossing New Leaf is that you're on a deserted island, and in the process, you become the island's resident representative, right? And I mean, I think being on a deserted island is a sufficiently new idea for this game, right? Because before you're always in a pre built town, and now the idea is sort of that you are supposed to build up this island into, uh, well, appropriately enough, a town. But I actually feel like that premise is sort of backwards when you actually get to the tail end, like the tail end of the game. There's really no end. You're supposed to play it forever because it's a life simulation. But I digress. To me, I think the idea of being on a deserted island is great until you're able to do all of the new things, like build from an island tent into a town hall and get a bunch of shops on the island, and even like clean up all the weeds all the time and make it a super clean, pretty looking place because, well, then you're not on a deserted island anymore. Like you're just on an island that happens to be inhabited by you all, and now you've made it a very you and your villagers have made it a very, like, you've impacted the island greatly. And in terms of being the resident representative, that it seems like it's just a title that they picked that's kind of there. And it to me it gives you a lot of powers that your character just seems to have because you are the player. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit when it comes to uh, this new stuff like the Island Designer application. But there's a bunch of new stuff to talk about in this game, right? So one of the tools that I talked about that really intrigued me during the preview was the wand. And I hate to say it, but the wand is pretty lame. So with the wand, it's a new tool that you get, that you build it when you collect star fragments on nights where there are meteor showers. On a night where there's a meteor shower, you'll wish upon the star, and then the next day, a bunch of star fragments will show up on the beach. That's the idea. And with a large star fragment and a couple of regular star fragments, you can craft a wand. And the wand basically lets you save 8 preset outfits. Like you plan out what the outfit's going to look like, and then you can change into any of those outfits at any time just by using the wand. Here's the problem, right? If you have a wand outfit on, you can't edit it when you get new clothes from, say, the Able Sisters, or if you just go to your closet and you're like, I think I don't want to change like the whole outfit, but I just want to like put on a different hat. You can't do that if you're wearing a wand outfit. So you have to go out, take off the wand outfit, then go into the menu to edit the wand outfits, and then maybe you'll want to go ahead and change it later back to something else anyway, or what you had originally. Instead of just being able to change the one piece when you go to your closet. So the wand item as a feature, kind of lame. New tools, you have the ladder and the pole vaulting stick, which are the only 2 tools that can't break. So we're gonna talk about the breaking tools as an issue, but that's not really important here. What's important is that these tools are great at the start of the game. And you get the ladder to climb up cliffs, and you have the pole vault to jump across the river to the other side. But then you can build bridges and hill inclines later in the game. So those tools basically become useless as long as you put bridges in pretty convenient spots. It's like, it's not like I say they're useless, but they're not completely useless, because sometimes you just want to get across the river at a specific spot instead of having to run all the way across the bridge, right? But if you get to place the bridges because you're the resident representative, and you have to fund them all, right? So if you place your bridge in a pretty convenient spot, when are you ever going to use your pole vault? If you put an incline at a spot that lets you get to all the things you need, why would you ever take the time to switch to your ladder and use it up, right? So these tools are great ideas, but they end up being half-baked because ultimately the game still wants to fall back on these old design options of bridges and inclines, which like they're way more convenient, and I totally understand wanting to put that in the game, right? And I think they're good, but they lose their utility too early in the game, in my opinion. Another new feature for New Horizons, and this is gonna sound silly as it's just a little thing, is that you can put furniture items outside. So like you could put a rocking chair out in a field for whatever reason. And it may sound silly because you'd think you weren't able to do that before. No, you were not able to put furniture outside. And really, to me, it's not a super game-changing feature, but I suppose it lets you do certain other decorating things with your land. I've never been a big decorator when it comes to Animal Crossing. So like I have some stuff out in places. Like I have there's a secret rock area at the very back of your island. I put a toy rocket out there to make it seem like it's like a secret launch base. But yeah, I don't do much other stuff than that. And if anything, I actually feel like it takes away a certain feature from before. So in Animal Crossing New Leaf, you had public works projects, which are just basically like giant special items that you were able to put outside and that you were able to fund, including the bridges that I talked about when talking about these new tools here. And I just wish there was more big stuff like that you were still able to do. But, being able to put out furniture, it just really makes sense. But to me, it's not this super mind-blowing addition that it's going to be to other people. Another thing is the house designer. So when you go into your house, if you press down on the D-pad, it brings up like a grid view where you can start placing things. And I think this new house designer it's fine. It basically does the best it can do with the Nintendo Switch hardware. So in Animal Crossing New Leaf, just for comparison, this was after the Welcome Amiibo update came out and Happy Home Designer was already out. You could there was also a grid where you could see your items, but they were just there were representations of the items. Like it was like you could see a little 2-square block, but it had pluses on it, so you could put plus like items on it. So maybe that thing could be a dining room table, and then the little green thing with a plus circle is a vase that you can put on that table. It would make more sense with some imagery, and I'll probably try to put something up here so it can make more sense, but that's sort of the idea. Whereas with New Horizons, they just you have to move. Like, you only have the one screen, so you could see the grid and all these items on the touch screen and see what you're actually moving on the top screen of the 3DS. Whereas now you're limited to one screen trying to move stuff, and it's fine, but it's a little clunkier than the 2-screen options of the 3DS. But it lets me make a nice, pretty little house, so that's good. Another new feature is Harvey's Photopia Island. It's okay. I don't really try to set up pretty shots and stuff like that of my characters. It's just not something that appeals to me. It was used in the first part of I think this was the second spring update where it was preparing some of the stuff for summer. With the wedding season holiday, I used it then a couple times and got some of the wedding items from Reese and Cyrus. But basically about after like 3 or 4 days, I was done with it because I had to set up the same shots for them 2 times in a row. So like they would be like, on the first day, try to set up our wedding ceremony. So I did that. I got my items. The second day came, do our reception. Okay, I did the reception. Then I came back the third day. Hey, do our wedding ceremony. Wait, I thought I already did your wedding ceremony. But now we have a couple more new items you can use. Okay, I did that. And then this 4th day was, do our reception. We have more new things for you to use. Again, pretty boring. Just not really. I'm not into making pictures like that, especially when the premise is, do this thing, now do it again, now do this other thing, and do it again. It gets pretty boring. And then I guess I would like to talk about the 2 major, big, updated, or new features for Animal Crossing New Horizons. These are the things that I talked about in my direct preview that I wasn't so hot on, Nook Miles and Nook Miles Tickets and the Island Designer app. Let's start with Nook Miles and Nook Miles Tickets. So I was concerned during the direct preview discussion that Nook Miles, as a general concept, sort of missed the point of Animal Crossing, right? Because in Animal Crossing, you're supposed to be able to do what you want when you want to do it, and you're supposed to be doing it because it's your life and you're living it how you want to. Whereas this incentivizes you to play things the way the game wants you to do it, because you can get some points which you can exchange for stuff that you actually want, right? And I have to come and confess, Nook Miles are okay. Nook Miles Plus is dumb. So Nook Miles it's sort of like an achievement sort of service thing. Basically, you get Nook Miles for doing certain tasks, but you only get those one time, okay? So you get an initial certain amount just for having started playing the game. You'll get some number of Nook Miles for catching a specific number of fish and getting them in your encyclopedia, and then you'll get more for catching another number of fish, right? And bugs and all that sort of stuff. That's fine. I like that, because that gives you, because already you should be incentivized to one extent or another inherently to do those things, right? It's like, well, I already wanted to go fishing. I just get this bonus because I went fishing and I wanted to, and it's only this one time. So it's not like I only wanted to go fishing because I knew there was a reward for it. Nook Miles Plus is the exact opposite. So Nook Miles Plus, you get later in your experience because, you know, eventually you're going to run it. Like, there's only a finite number of Nook Miles options. Whereas Nook Miles Plus just gives you a little reward for doing something that you would do during the day anyway. Like, dig up 3 fossils. Well, I wasn't planning. You know, I think it does a disservice to the game to do something, to, like, be in a situation where it's like, well, I don't want to dig up any fossils, but I guess since I get 200 Nook Miles, I'll do it. If you don't care about fossils, then don't dig up fossils. Get 500 Nook Miles for planting some flowers. Well, I don't really care about planting flowers, but since I get 500 Nook Miles from it, I'm gonna do it. That's the game telling you how to play, not you deciding how to play your game that you bought. You see what I'm saying there? And, I mean, you know, sure, like, I don't want to be misrepresenting myself here, because I think a game should tell you how to play depending on the type of game it is, right? So if you have a game where part of the idea is like, hey, you have this objective and you need to do it, like in a role-playing game, that's fine. This is a life simulation game. This is me choosing how to live out my life among these other people. So telling me, hey, you know, like a carrot on a stick, you'll get this thing here if you're willing to do this thing that I'm telling you to, that does a disservice to the player, in my opinion. The Nook Miles tickets are rewards that you can get for spending Nook Miles that you go to Mystery Islands, which in my opinion are also extremely lame. Because essentially they're just like, you'll get a totally random island that you'll travel to for a certain number of miles, right? And you could maybe get like a super exciting, amazing island that, like, when you go fishing in the ocean, all you get are sharks and you make a ton of money off of it. Or you could get an island where you just have a ton of coconut trees all over the place. And you'll make a little bit of money and only have a little bit of fun. And maybe you'll meet a new villager to bring to your island back. Which is fine, but I prefer in Animal Crossing New Leaf the Tortimer Island, actually, for a couple of reasons here. First off, in Tortimer Island, you had these island tours that you could go on. So you could go ahead and do these other mini games while you're there instead of just hanging out on the island doing whatever you wanted. But the other thing that I liked about Tortimer Island is that you were guaranteed to come back with something good for your experience. So maybe it was the fact that, oh man, it's winter in town right now, and I want to get some of these summer items that I can't get. Well, in Tortimer Island, it's summertime all around. So I'm missing these like diving creatures that I can't get right now in the winter. I'll just go to Tortimer Island and get those summer ones that I'm missing. Right? You can help complete your catalog. If you if you rent a bug net, you're guaranteed to get specific bugs to show up on the trees that happen to be worth a lot of bells because they're only available in the summer. And even if no matter what time of year it is, if it's at night, you're always going to have that. So that's like, there's an inherent value to you to want to go to Tortimer Island. Like, you get this extrinsic reward for it, sure, but you always have the intrinsic goal of making more money. And if you want to go there because you specifically want to make more money, right? And plus, it's just fun to catch these bugs that you are like super hard, right? That just happen to get you a lot of money. The other big controversial thing, in my opinion, is the Island Designer application, which comes in two forms. You have designing paths and terraforming, meaning that you can like literally build dirt structures or make waterfalls and change the direction of the river and stuff. I have had this app probably for a couple months now, and I have never once opened it. Why? Because, as I said in my preview, paths are one of the most overrated things you can do in Animal Crossing, and I simply do not care about terraforming. When I went to pick an island layout at the very start of the game, I picked a layout that I knew I would be happy with. And, sure, there may be some areas that would be inconvenient, but as long as I put up bridges and I put up inclines that are sufficient, I don't really need to, change the river's direction so that I can get to this place more easily. Or I don't have to take down this portion of the cliff because I can get up to the cliff using this incline that I spent money on, right? That I spent bells on, I should say. Money is in Animal Crossing's own money. Well, I guess I should. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about terraforming. It's a waste of time for me. I'm not going to spend the Nook miles on getting those options because I don't need them. I don't care. I simply do not care because I'm happy with my layout. And then when it comes to paths, right? I haven't even bought any of the designs for the paths or used it because, and that gets back to the sort of thing I talked about in the premise here, that turns this deserted island just into another Animal Crossing town, right? You're not on a deserted island anymore if you've made specific roads that go places, right? I mean, I've just never cared about paths anyway because I just kind of want everything to be natural and have things be sort of random when I'm walking around. But I especially think it's egregious here to have these paths because, again, you're not on a deserted island once you've made a path, like a specific dirt road, when it really should be just kind of sprawling out all over the place because it's deserted. But that's just my opinion on those paths and all that sort of stuff. I know it's fairly controversial, but it is what it is. Returning features. So there's been a bunch more returning features in the game. You've got catching bugs, catching fish. Now, as of early July, we have the return of deep sea diving and wetsuits. And you have, in the museum, you could collect your bugs and your fish and your fossils. But then, in June, if I remember correctly, now Crazy Red got a ship and you can finally start your art collection again. There's another, there's a bunch of features that are in the game that should be there, right? And, they work fine. You can go around and talk to villagers and they'll give you tasks. Although for whatever reason, I cannot seem under any circumstances to get my villager to ask me for a favor. I don't know what it is. I'll get lost items every so often, but I can't ever seem to get a villager to ask me, "Hey Brandon, could you go get me a golden trout from the river?" And I can say, "Yeah, I can do it," or "Nah, I don't have the time." You can still go buy clothes. You can go make custom designs of clothes. You can now, as of basically early August, late July, you can go. There's no dream suite, but you can make a dream address for your island. But that gets into the next thing, which is a pretty important question, in my opinion. Is this game really even finished? I say this because of the updates that have come out for the game so far. I look at this second summer update as a great example of what I mean. This came out, like I said, late July. It might have even been like July 30th. And you added, like, the game received the ability to establish dream addresses, which was a feature already present in the base game of Animal Crossing: A New Leaf. If I remember correctly, that was the update where you got Gulliver, which is a new variant on Gulliver the Seagull that comes dressed up as a pirate that can come in. Actually, no, that might be the early summer update. The point is, aside from like one or two things, all these updates are adding is old stuff that was already in the past games to begin with when you bought the game, right? You paid, well, at this point for New Horizons, I paid $60. When I pay $60 for an Animal Crossing game, I should expect to get Animal Crossing with all the trappings. Not Animal Crossing with some of the trappings, and it'll give you a couple big new things, and we'll just add all that old stuff later on, right? When I spent $40 on Animal Crossing New Leaf, I got Animal Crossing with all the past features, and I mean, it's fine to take some out. If you want, like, it was fine to take some things out, but it wasn't like they added them later on. Unless it was something like in the Welcome Amiibo update, they added the character back of Wisp, right? But that update ultimately added basically all new stuff in terms of being able to use Amiibo in New Leaf, right? That's what I signed up for, was getting a game that had things that I should expect because it's Animal Crossing and, you know, some new things, right? And even then, there's a bunch of other things missing, like there's basically no furniture sets in the game, which is a staple of Animal Crossing, is trying to collect furniture sets, like the Jingle set for Christmas, or the Harvest set during American Thanksgiving time, or even something generic like the Green set. And part of that has to do with the crafting. I guess that's something I really didn't touch on. I can't believe I didn't talk about that. But with the crafting, right, the idea is supposed to be, well, you're collecting all this wood, so you'll just make a wooden set, like a wooden bed, and then you can go back and customize it to have a set of stripe sheets instead of us making a separate stripe set, right? Which is fine, but then all the furniture is pretty homogeneous. Like, no matter what, I'm going to have the same design of bed, it seems like. Unless there just happens to be a set for a certain type of, like, style, right? And to me, that is an issue, because it greatly reduces what you can go ahead and collect. I'm just going to take a minute here, because I'm like yelling. I feel like I'm yelling. Oh, and I feel like I'm losing my voice, but, you know, see what happens. Yeah, like I think it's called like the exotic bed or something of that effect, which is like a big red, almost sort of Chinese looking style bed. I hate to make that like generic comparison, but that's the only thing that unfortunately comes to mind. And that actually it has, you know, poles, and it has an overhang on it. But there's not a lot of furniture that's like that. There's a lot of unique furniture items, like an arcade game and a pinball machine and, you know, like teacups and all that sort of stuff. But there's not, you know, you're not going to go into the Nickling shop and find three different, like a bed that's a certain color or shape and like a certain type of couch. No, you'll just find the same thing over and over and be able to customize it. So, that pretty much covers my thoughts on the game. I'm gonna give full disclosure here. The review in the Creative Outlet bonus, now that I'm like super trying to push it, but it's significantly better than what I had to say here. If only because I can genuinely, like, you know, I've had these notes for a very long time, and I genuinely, with some of the short little notes I had here, can't remember a lot of what I wanted to say. I do have one other point of, like, what would I want to change, add, or get rid of,
change. The big one is just if there is something that was already in the series, it should have been in the game from the start. That's the big change. What would I add? I really can't think of a lot of things that I would want to add to New Horizons. Maybe more unique tasks for villagers to give you, since I just can't seem to get any. And in terms of what to get rid of, I could take or leave the island designer. I know a lot of people love it, but I don't really need it. I could personally get rid of it and be happy. But ultimately, I have to say I still like Animal Crossing New Horizons. It's a sufficient game. I've gotten my $60 out of it, but it is still far from my game of the year because of the many issues that I have seen with it. So, let's go on to a bit more serious, important, and pressing topic for topic number 2. Should we be going back physically to college? So it's August 12th, right? We're getting into school season. And there's a lot of students who have already gone back to college. There are some that have not. There are plenty that have gone even into elementary and high school, right? But I think a question that we should be asking is, should we actually go back? Are we in a safe time with COVID-19 where it makes sense to go back? So, a little while ago, I saw an article on Medium. God, I'm trying to remember. Oh, yes. So the premise of it was comparing how higher education and religious institutions are practicing what they should be doing. So a lot of religious institutions are being pretty smart and saying, maybe we shouldn't have in-person services. As much as we want it and we could use the money, it is safer to keep the members of our congregation at home, right? Which is great. I think that's exactly what they should be doing. Whereas a lot of institutions of higher education are planning on having, upwards of 7,000 students living in the dormitories. So, for example, as I stated, I live in the state of Wisconsin, so I want to talk about what the University of Wisconsin system has planned here, right? So they have plans like, we're going to have mostly in-person classes. We're going to have some that are partially in-person. We're going to have some that are online, right? But it just really depends on the level of the class and how many people are going to be there. And, we're going to make sure that there's hand sanitizer and cleaning supplies in all the classrooms, and there's going to be we're going to make sure people are getting tested randomly in their dorm. You're going to go to their room and knock on their door and ask them to take a test without their consent, right? Basically, you have to be like, hey, you're going to take your test because you're here. The UW-Madison campus, for example, has a much more detailed plan, including things like, I think they're going to be doing all of those same sorts of things. What I read is that about 37% of classes are only going to be online, which, that sounds like a lot, right? That sounds like it could be a pretty safe amount. I mean, it's just it's just shy of half, but you have to remember how many students then are going to classes. Really, you should be going the opposite way and talking about it in that direction. You should be going 100 minus 37, which would mean that 63% of classes are either in-person or hybrid, which is a lot of classes. And as you can imagine, right, there's a lot of staff that aren't really happy about this plan either, right? And even then, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, they have this there's a super detailed plan. They have a plan that after Thanksgiving, all students are going to be taking virtual classes anyway, up until exams, which granted is a week or two later anyway. So, and that's based on the premise that, having people going home and coming back to campus all of a sudden is going to increase the risk of COVID-19 infections on campus. So why doesn't that logic apply for going back in the first place? That just doesn't make any sense, right? You would think that coming from wherever you are in the country and going to campus would automatically increase infections on campus. Like, duh. That's just obvious. Yeah, they're going to require face masks indoors with like certain accommodations. They're going to do physical distancing in classrooms like you'd want. But a lot of what places like this want is for students to take personal responsibility, which I totally, I talked about that in the very start. A lot of this is just doing what you think is safe, right? But this is not your personal life choosing to go out and do a thing. This is this institution that you have chosen to go to is making you return there, whether you like it or not, right? It's really a false choice to say that you are going back to campus because you aren't really choosing to. You're just kind of going there because they said, because you happen to have an in-person class, so you have to be there. Sure, you could change it and maybe get an online class, but what are the odds of that working out, right? I mean, I feel incredibly fortunate in looking at my class schedule in that I got all online classes when I picked them back in, God, probably November or December. No, it might have been, what am I saying? I picked them in the spring. Duh. I picked probably around February, I want to say, was when I picked classes for this fall. And, my plan before all this whole global pandemic thing happened was to be on campus. And now that is fortunately no longer happening. If you can find a way, if you have all online classes and you happen to have a housing contract with your institution to get out of it, get out of it. Because there's no place in the nation, in the United States of America, that I would trust sending thousands of young people to. So, if you want another great example, I think housing is really the main issue here, right? So let me give an example, right? Their plan is to reduce the overall density of dormitories and residence halls and all that sort of stuff. And the university is only going to limit access to university housing residents only, with no guests of any kind. Except you can, bring one person into your room from, another part of the building, which is somehow fine. But you have to do physical distancing and wear masks. This is an institution, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, that takes pride in the fact that a whole 25% of first-year students, or I think it's 1 in 4, so that'll be 25%, don't, or go through their whole first year without drinking illegally. 1 in 4. Which, when you say 1 in 4, sounds like a lot until you realize that's only 25% of students. They cannot sufficiently police underage students from drinking during regular times, but somehow we're going to make it so that in university housing there's not going to be large gatherings and people get sick and we're going to have to send them home anyway? Really? Is that what you think? I think that, again, this plan here, this is just one such example, is very detailed. It could work in theory, but in practice, it is not going to work. I give most places, depending on when they start, about 2 months tops before they send all their students home. Why? Because this is not going to work out in practice. They have about 7,500 to 8,000 students who live on campus, and they have 800 rooms set aside for isolation for when students get sick. Since athletes have been going back in June, there have already been 21 cases of COVID-19 among athletes. Granted, that's pretty good among 235 students over 2 months. I can't deny that. But that's still about 8% of athletes over 2 months. If you balloon that out to the rest of the campus, that's about 3,000 people who get sick. Because the campus size is about 40,000 people, give or take a few thousand. So And that's obviously many more than 800 rooms. And that's not including staff, that's not including faculty in terms of like professors and all that stuff. So, why should anybody be going back right now? Does that sound safe to anyone? And granted, there are also a lot of issues, like the president is specifically making a point of, well, if you don't have international students go back, we can't let them keep their visa, which is just throwing red meat to his base of like, well, we won't have these immigrants being here illegally, right? So, I don't know. I don't know what much more I can say about this other than simply I feel terrible for all of the students who have to go back. I feel incredibly fortunate in not being forced to do so. If you do have to go to school in any capacity, including elementary or high school, I hope just make sure to do whatever you can to be safe. Even if there's peer pressure against it, please wear your face masks. There are some school districts that have a policy against wearing masks in general. But I would imagine that during this time they're gonna be not they're gonna let you wear a mask of some kind because they want you to be safe. I know there are some kids who, for this is just weird to me. Obviously, I just got out of high school 2 years ago. There's some kids who are like very clingy to each other, like they'll literally be at the lunch table and like laying on each other and stuff. Don't do that right now, please. Like, I get if you want to, I get why you want to. I mean, I guess I personally don't because that's not something I would do or would want to do. But if that's something that you like to do, I understand. But it's more important that you stay healthy and not receive any long-reaching effects of this pandemic disease than doing this little thing right now to make you happy, okay? And I get that, especially in regards to like the mental toll it could be taking on you, potentially having to be home all the time and not being able to go out and do anything. But it is that important. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that. I think the next thing, the next thing on my notes here is the roundup of the not fifth, what am I saying? The ninth generation of consoles. How exciting of a time is it to live when you know that you have multiple new pieces of hardware coming in the great year 2020? Oh, the great year 2020. I say that sarcastically quite clearly. Alright, we're gonna go full on Western here with a roundup. No, I kid. I'm not gonna go Western here, but it is a roundup because we're gonna talk about the ninth generation of consoles. All of them are on the horizon, except one of them's here because it's the Nintendo Switch. But the other two pieces of hardware that are going to be coming out this year are Microsoft's Xbox Series X and the Sony PlayStation 5, both of which have been revealed for the world to see. And for the longest time, right, you've had commentators. I mentioned when it came to the the Traders to America list in the introduction, Review Tech USA, for example, and even those good old people I like on the Completely Unnecessary podcast, talking about how we could be on the last generation of consoles. They thought the 8th generation was going to be the last generation, but I'm going to make the argument here that we could be in a place where if Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft hold on to the greatest asset from each of their systems, that consoles could continue on for a while. Although it seems like Microsoft really doesn't want that, which is totally fine. I think they're planning, in terms of the super long term, very intelligently by doing what they're doing. But ultimately, I want to talk about what console makers need to be successful. And really, they need a few things. Number one, a good price. We don't know the prices for the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 yet, so it's not really something I want to discuss here. We do obviously know the price of the Nintendo Switch being $299, which is a nice, cheap little price for this underpowered system compared to its competitors. What they need is sufficiently stronger hardware from the last generation. So in that case, so you could see that obviously when it came to upgrading from something like the NES to the SNES, upgrading from the Sony PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2, upgrading from the Xbox to the Xbox 360 going into HD. That would have those are sufficiently stronger pieces of hardware compared to the last generation in terms of graphics. But we need to think about stronger hardware in a different way here because we're if we haven't hit the graphics plateau yet, we're pretty close to hitting that graphics plateau. Which gets me to what's most important here, which is a clear inherent benefit to having this piece of hardware. So in that sense, I mean some sort of not quite twist that makes you want that hardware, but something that makes it that when you are given the pitch of what this thing is, and you know a bunch of the things you can do, you can see, okay, this is why I would want this console, right? So basically, I just want to talk about what each of these console manufacturers should be doing here, right? Let's start with Microsoft. So to me, what Microsoft needs to do to continue making Xbox hardware successful is be what I would call the legacy console. So when I say that, I think about how the Series X, at least according to Microsoft, is going to be compatible with games from every single one of their consoles. The original Xbox, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and obviously now new Series X games. So that is something that Microsoft can really, really, really tap into to appear super duper pro-consumer, right? Because especially with the new feature that they're talking about called Smart Delivery. And what Smart Delivery basically is any game that is already compatible on the Xbox One may be enhanced with Smart Delivery on the Series X. So a great example is going to be Crash Bandicoot 4. It's about time, which, yeah, it is about time the Crash Bandicoot 4 is coming around. But I digress from that. You can play Crash Bandicoot 4 on the Xbox One when it comes out in October. But you'll also be able to put it in the Series X and receive major graphical and frame rate enhancements to the game. Which I guess that's not too different from backwards compatibility, but essentially that's the idea here in that sense. Is with it being the legacy console, you don't have to, like, you can upgrade and get a new piece of hardware, right? But still be able to play everything. It doesn't matter if you have an original Xbox game. It doesn't matter if you have a 360 game. Odds are you will be able to play it on the Series X. And that is extremely enticing for consumers. Because then, in that sense, they don't have to feel pressured to get a bunch of new games because they already have a massive library from whatever Xbox consoles they've happened to have in the past. Maybe they started with the original Xbox during the 6th generation. You know, now they can play good old rares grabbed by the ghoulies on their Xbox Series X with a huge graphical resolution. That's the word I was looking for. Granted, it'll probably stay the same frame rate that it was on the original Xbox, but it still works. They don't have to go ahead and dig out their original Xbox or their 360 to be able to play it. If they bought, what's another good example? If they wanted to play one of the old, I guess it's weird to call it old school. Not that it's something I really played, but I guess it's sort of old school now because it's 2 generations ago. If they want to play one of the old Call of Duties from the 360, they can just pop that into their Series X and it'll work right away. And like I said, with the Xbox One games, you have Smart Delivery. So every Xbox, well, I guess I don't know if it's every Xbox One game, but for sure a ton of Xbox One games will just work out of the box. In fact, I specifically remember Phil Spencer talking about how, you know, there's not going to be a Series X exclusive for a long while. Like a one that absolutely will not be able to run on the Xbox One as is. So that's very exciting. That's a very pro-consumer move because, especially right now during this time where a lot of people are financially struggling in the US, they might not be able to have the money to buy an Xbox Series X right now. If they do, they do, and that's great. But they could just keep buying new games for their Xbox One and keep playing on that, which is huge. Because especially in the past, when you would see something like, what's a good example? Like Metal Gear Solid 5, if I remember correctly, was both on the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4. I think it was just Ground Zeroes that was on the PS3. I just want to check just to be absolutely certain. For whatever reason, my computer isn't getting internet, so let me pull out my cellular device here quick just to make absolutely certain. Yes, so the... Oh, actually, even the full game, The Phantom Pain, was available on the PS3, the 360, the PS4, and the Xbox One. The PS4, or excuse me, the PS3 and the 360 versions, though, were definitely way neutered compared to the PS4 and Xbox One versions, right? But being able to have basically the same game out of the box on the Xbox One and the Series X could be huge benefits to them. That's their one inherent benefit that they need. And obviously the Series X is going to be stronger hardware than the Xbox One. Otherwise you wouldn't have better performance on it than the One. One thing that I do think it could do better is to not look like a refrigerator. Yes, all of the consoles right now, to one extent, in my opinion, look kind of stupid. And the Xbox Series X looks like a refrigerator. And it, or even like an old tower PC, but like super, like it's like, or even the GameCube, but stretched super tall. It looks ridiculous to me. I've never seen a console that looks quite like that. In regards to what Sony needs to do, they really have two things. Number one, they need to embrace the PlayStation 5's SSD and VR. So I distinctly remember, it's like I didn't actually watch the PlayStation 5 event because I like sticking to one system, and ultimately I know I'm going to want to play the Nintendo games. Not that I don't think I should branch out, because if I were to branch out, I would probably rather get a PlayStation 5, just because I've owned the PlayStation 2 and a bunch of it. Like, I've played a bunch of PlayStation games in the past, and I've preferred it over the Xbox brand, but I digress. I remember viewing the roundup, at least, of the PS5 reveal, and there were two games that stuck out to me during it. One that was like the way you do not want to market a new console today, and the way that you do want to market it. So, to me, the way that Sony discussed NBA 2K21 is not how you want to show off a new console. And I talked about it earlier in the Animal Crossing New Horizons review here, right? What the 2K21 segment primarily focused on is how so much better the game is going to look on the PlayStation 5 compared to the PlayStation 4 version of 2K20, right? It's going to look so much more realistic. You can see all like the individual hairs and the sweat beads and all that sort of stuff. And like I said, we're getting closer and closer, if not already there, with the graphics plateau. So really what you're doing with that is showing that this console is not going to have longevity. What do I mean when I say that? So when Sony goes ahead in a few years from now and decides, okay, we need to make the PlayStation 6, well, we can't really make the graphics any better on it. What are you supposed to market that on then? If all you're focused on is the graphics, right? We can render zits on them now. See, that's not a selling point. Where you can only go so far with it. Where they did really well, to me, that shows the strength of the PlayStation 5 with that SSD, is with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. So the whole idea of that game is how the main characters, Ratchet and Clank, are going to travel through rifts into other worlds, and we see it happen. They travel from one world to a completely different looking world in a snap. Instantly. And that's only possible with the PlayStation 5 solid state hard drive, their SSD. So I guess basically what I'm saying is Sony needs to lean into the fact that consumers are going to basically have no annoying load times, right? You're going to go through one environment to a totally wildly different one in an instant. You're never going to have any loading screens to have to go through because you're always in the game. Granted, you're going to lose like the tips and the tricks and all that sort of fun stuff you get because you have loading screens, but to me, that may end up being a small price to pay if loading can be as instantaneous, at least, as Sony is making it look. And the other thing I said they had to lead into is that Sony really has the only affordable true VR set that doesn't require a complicated, powerful PC. Nintendo has the Nintendo Labo VR kit, but that's not really being used in the traditional VR sense, if only because it doesn't have a head strap. That's annoying. Whereas the PS4 right now is really the only console in that sense that uses VR. That is a huge boon to Sony. If you want to play VR games, but you don't want to put the investment it takes to get a super powerful PC and have to learn like all the ins and outs of using Linux or Windows or whatever, I can't imagine Mac OS would be great with VR, but I digress. Maybe it could be. If you just want to have that out-of-the-box experience, the PlayStation 4 and 5 are going to be for you. It's that simple. And then that gets into what Nintendo needs to do. So I want to talk about, because we already have the Nintendo Switch out. Really what I want to talk about is the Nintendo Switch's inevitable successor. And to me, there's 3 routes that Nintendo could go down. But there's only one of those 3 I think could be the truly successful option. The first route I could see Nintendo going down when they're done with the Switch is, we're going to do something completely, totally different. Why? That's what failed with the Wii U. Why would you want to go down something completely, totally different that could end up being a total failure, right? Just because it's new doesn't mean it's going to be good. Now, granted, I want to see these console manufacturers innovate. Part of the reason why I don't want a Series X is that it's super boring, right? Not only does it look like a refrigerator, but it's just another piece of hardware with a console that hooks up to a TV. That's boring. It doesn't do anything special, necessarily, other than the smart delivery, which is brilliant. Well, the PS5, it's great. It looks like an internet router, which is something I should have mentioned. There's a problem with it. I wish it didn't look like a stupid internet router, or that the one with the discs looks like it has a giant butt coming off of it compared to the all-digital edition. But I digress from that too. But those are, at the end of the day, they're still just boxes you hook up to your TV. Nintendo has always tried to do something that's a little bit more than just a box you hook up to your TV post the SNES, right? Or the N64. You could have 4 players play out of the box on the console. That was huge. With the GameCube, it was something as simple as, we have a handle on the back, and we made it small so you can take it with you to parties and stuff. And it just had the greatest controller on the planet, apparently. I don't really have an opinion on that either way, but people swear by the GameCube controller. With the Wii, motion controls. With the Wii U, their first real true failure on this, a second screen for a console. Is your idea something that people want and is new? That's the question that Nintendo has to be asking. So I would not recommend going down the path of doing something totally new, because the Switch, at least, or just recently passed 60 million units sold. It's a popular idea. It's something that could change the landscape of gaming. The second option that they could go with is, kind of like I just said, releasing their own boring box. Why? First off, that's just not a very Nintendo thing to do, as I just outlined, because they like to change it up with every piece of hardware that they do, even with their handhelds. Here's a gray brick. Now it's in color. Now it's even more powerful and has shoulder buttons, and instead of being tall, it'll be wide. We'll have 2 screens. We'll do 3D vision, or 3D, stereoscopic 3D, what am I saying? And again, Nintendo always seems to go with the least powerful hardware they can possibly get that's just enough of an upgrade. So if you're already going out of the gate with assuming that they're going to have the least powerful console, then at least make sure it has something different so that it has that inherent benefit to it. Really what they should do, and this is the third option, is invest in this idea of the Switch. Okay, Google Stadia is trying to kind of sort of be a console you can take on the go because you can just use it on Android, but it's failing because you need to stream the game. xCloud could be really good with that, but we don't know yet. You still have to stream the games, and while it could, well, it still seems like it's performing better compared to Stadia. I mean, first, it's not officially out, so we'll have to see what happens when it gets fully implemented and adopted. You still have to stream the game. The Switch has the benefit that the games are downloaded directly to it because it is an independent unit. Either the game, or you have a cartridge that you put in there to play. So lean into the fact that it could be the best portable gaming experience you can get if you want to play more than mobile games. That's what I would do if I were Nintendo. And while I don't think the Switch console itself out of the dock looks super stupid, in the dock it can look kind of funny and like a weird sort of sandwich that's overflowing. So the other thing that all these console manufacturers need to do is make better, less stupid looking designs. So that is the 9th generation console roundup. We just have one more topic to chat about here today. My good old-fashioned favorite thing to do, I've done it once here now, a Smash character analysis for Min Min from ARMS. So if you'll remember, one of the early episodes of this podcast, I did a discussion of the Byleth reveal for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Well, one of the things I talked about I brought it up. It technically wasn't announced at that event. It was announced during Terry's stream. Was the announcement of the Smash Bros. Ultimate Fighters Pass Volume 2. And Monday, June 22nd, was the big day once again for it. Because, going back actually to the late March Nintendo Direct, we knew that there would be a character from, ARMS coming, which is one of the early Nintendo Switch games, being added to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And that character was the Ramen Bomber herself, Min Min. So, watching the reveal, it was pretty neat. You know, I think it was a lot better than the Byleth one in that it was just a fun little reveal. It was a lot better than the Terry one in that we didn't watch Min Min's whole classic mode. That helped. But, you know, it was Sakurai going over Min Min the character as normal. You learned some fun little information in that reveal, and that basically his whole decision was really decided by ARMS producer Kosuke Ibuki, and that he was like, I want Min Min to be the character. So Min Min was the character. I really wasn't entirely sure what to expect going into it, I guess. Really, I figured the two top characters would have either been Min Min or it would have been I can't think of her name, Twintel. Just because then you get the benefit. Like, I think that there's definitely some sort of representation angle going into picking these characters, and that, you know, like, why did Ridley and King K. Rool get revealed? Not only because they're popular characters that people have been wanting forever, but they're also villains, which is something that Smash Brothers needed a lot more of in its roster. And there were two right there. 2 new villains added to the game. But another thing in general is that Smash Brothers needs more female characters, and there you go. Here's another one to add to the pile. Good old Min Min from ARMS. I kind of thought maybe they'd try to go back and do Springman and Ribbon Girl as like alts for each other, but I figured because Springman was an assist trophy that they wouldn't do that. It's kind of who I would have wanted, but that's just because my 2 mains in ARMS are Springman and Mechanica. But, you know, it happens. It's fine. Min Min's a great character, and she's probably one of my new favorite Smash Brothers main playable characters. So one thing about it is because, as I've brought up many times during this episode, there's this whole COVID-19 pandemic. The whole presentation was recorded from Sakurai's house, and I loved that. Not because I want to see what this developer's house looks like in a creepy way. No, that's not it. It's just because you got to see him kind of show his, like, goofy, nerdy little side, and that, like, he has 2 big HD TVs sitting next to each other with, like, it looked like 16 some odd consoles hooked up to it, like you saw an Xbox One, you saw a PS4, and I think you saw a PS4 Pro too. You saw a PlayStation Classic, SNES. You saw a Super Famicom Classic, and he has an American SNES Classic edition system. And then there's just a bunch of other retro consoles. There was a Wii U hooked up. Of course, there was a Nintendo Switch. So a whole bunch of different stuff was there, and I thought that was pretty neat. And you got to see him be goofy later on. I don't do I have that in the notes here? Yeah, I do have that in the notes here. Was something he does with his plant that he plays. He was like, yeah, I got to like set up all these lights and cameras and stuff, and that was pretty neat. So it's just nice to see like someone who you think is like a corporate guy being like a human person for a bit. How about that trailer, right? That was a pretty good trailer. If only because they got Captain Falcon's voice actor to come in and record new lines. Now, if only he could record new lines for a certain new F-Zero game that's never going to exist, apparently. Where, it was like it was Captain Falcon and Kirby eating ramen at the ramen shop, where it's instantly obvious, okay, it's going to be Min Min who's the character, because, they're in the ramen shop that she works at. Good old Nintendo with an M, excuse me. Then we see Springman and Ribbon Girl, I believe, fighting over in Spring Stadium until an Smash Bros. Invitation floats in. Everybody tries to get it, kind of like the Terry video, but ultimately Min Min ends up getting it. She's costumed in like her worker uniform until she shows up in her real outfit and gets the invitation. It was just a pretty neat little trailer. And then at the end, we get to see Captain Falcon dress up as Min Min, basically in her worker attire, and that was a little weird but funny nonetheless. Min Min, yeah, good pick. Like I said, new female character, represents a new game on the Nintendo Switch. Technically, Byleth is still the youngest character, even though they're both from Switch games. And she's a unique little character. So let's just give an overview of like how she works. So Min Min still kind of works like a basic Smash character. She has like her normal aerial attack, like a dive kick for her down A. But her basic A and B button attacks are pretty unique in that the A button only makes her punch her left arm, whereas the B button only makes her punch her right arm. And so she technically doesn't have any like specific side and neutral specials and like attacks, because they both use her arm. But she still has a down special that lets her change her right arm. She has a tether recovery for her up special when she's in the air, and she does a big jump when she's on the ground using her up special. And she still has things like I can't think what it's called, but it's just like a combo when you're just tapping A quickly. So that sounded at first like that might be a little complicated, but as soon as I started playing her, everything sort of clicked, right? In that, like, you just have to keep in mind that A is the left arm and B is the right arm. The thing that I'm not really good at that Sakurai showed off is that, like, because, it's on a 2D plane, like, you can punch forward with the left arm and punch backward with the right arm. That's not something I'm really good at. But in general, they work, and it's pretty neat. And I think those ideas represent ARMS pretty well, although obviously I don't know if they needed, ultimately Min Min needed things just to work in Smash, like a recovery that wasn't something that would be in ARMS. So yeah, she works. She uses some kicks too, like she has a reflective up smash for her kick, which is neat because she already uses kicks in ARMS, so that works pretty well in translating the character. Interestingly, the stage that was picked for Min Min was Spring Stadium, as opposed to the Ramen Bowl, which is our actual stage in ARMS. Which, I get it, because the Ramen Bowl, like, it's kind of a boring stage in that it's just, a bowl. Literally a bowl. Where Spring Stadium lets you do some more neat stuff, and you can show things in the background, like there's a little sign that rotates through all the characters in ARMS through it with their logos and pictures of them and all that stuff. So that's pretty neat. But the stage design itself is just kind of a basic, not too different from Brawl's Yoshi's Island, with like arches at the top of the stage that you can hit, and then there's springs on the edges of the stage, and one in the middle that will randomly pop up, which I mean that makes it interesting than just a couple of simple platforms, and I think that's considered a stage hazard. So that makes the stage technically tournament legal. I would imagine. I can't think of why it wouldn't be, but personally, I think it's more fun with the springs on the edges of the platforms and the big one in the middle. Because the thing about those springs is that not only can you use them to like jump super high, but you'll do like an impact hit from into other characters if you hit them. So again, pretty neat little stuff there. The stage basically includes every song from every ARMS stage and a couple of extra ones from the game, like the basic Grand Prix theme, all that sort of stuff. I actually really like the new mix of the Grand Prix theme. I love "Ribbon Ring" is one of my favorite songs from ARMS. The other songs, it's not like they're bad, but those two are just my favorite, and I want to hear them every time. Let's see, there are a couple of Mii Fighter costumes shown off, as there are every time. I'm actually struggling to remember. Again, this is like a month and a couple of weeks ago. I really should remember which costumes there were. I know one of them is Ninjara as a third ARMS character. Or, excuse me, as a third ARMS costume for the Miis. You already had Springman and Ribbon Girl in the game. Here we go. Okay, so there was a Callie outfit. Callie is one of the MCs in Splatoon 1, and so is Marie. That was another one. Marie's a gunner outfit. Callie is a brawler outfit. And then there were a couple of third-party costumes added. So there's the Heihachi outfit. So this was an outfit that was also a DLC costume in Smash for Wii U that, for some reason, couldn't be in the base game again. We already had this with a bunch of the Mega Man costumes. Now we're doing it with the Heihachi costume as well. It's great that it's there. It's another brawler costume, but still kind of annoying. So far we have 3 brawler costumes, 1 gunner costume, and then the last one is the one that was supposed to be the big one, kind of like in how in the last pack you had the Cuphead outfit, and the one before that was the... was it the last? I think it was the one before it. The Sans outfit from a while back. This one was the Vault 111 jumpsuit with the Vault Boy mask as representation from Bethesda's Fallout series. Another Mii Gunner outfit, which those are all fine to me. I bought them all anyway because they're super cheap, and who knows, maybe I'll want to use it, or I'll have someone else who wants to wear that costume. But obviously, as somebody who hasn't played Fallout, that one wasn't as mind-blowing to me as like the Cuphead one is. That was pretty... I thought that was really cool. But as you'll notice, there's no Sword Fighter costume. It seems like there's been not, at least for DLC, there haven't been a ton of Sword Fighter costumes. Like in the Byleth pack, there were 3 Gunner costumes and 1 Sword Fighter. In the pack 4 with Terry, there were 4 Brawlers and 1 Sword Fighter. I guess the Fighters Pass 2 comes with its own exclusive Sword Fighter one. But the point is, there's a lot of Gunner ones, a lot of Brawler ones, not as many Sword Fighter ones, which is a little annoying. I just wish there's a little bit more equal representation, but that's really not all that important. I talked about the fun Captain Falcon fact that I had to save, but the last major announcement in that direct that Sakurai hid with his table plant. Finally, we have 2 more new amiibo coming this year. We have the Joker and Hero amiibos revealed for October 2nd, 2020 to be released. I'm very excited for those. I don't have them pre-ordered yet. I'll probably get on that pretty soon here. They'll just be same as any other amiibo that's come out so far. They'll look like their designs. What's interesting to me is that these don't have any Player 2 designs. That was something that happened with Corrin, Bayonetta, and Cloud with the end of the Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U amiibo. was they had, like, for Corrin, it was the male variant was the player 1, and the female variant was the player 2, and it's super ridiculously rare and expensive. For Bayonetta, you had her Bayonetta 2 costume, and their player 2 variant was the Bayonetta 1 costume, kind of flipped around there. Isn't that funny? And then for Cloud, his player 1 variant amiibo is his, like, basic Final Fantasy VII costume, and his second one is his Advent Children one. I thought they would do that again with Joker and have his regular Phantom Thief costume and have his school attire as the second as a player 2 variant. That didn't happen. I'm fine with that though, because that's less money I have to spend and, you know, less time I have to try searching for it. And with Hero, I think people were really, really hoping that there will be a costume for each of the Dragon Quest heroes, because right now, because it's just the Dragon Quest 11 hero, people wanted an Erdrick. That's the Dragon Quest 3 one, the Dragon Quest 4 hero, and the Dragon Quest 8 hero. And, you know, I'm fine without him, but I agree it would have been pretty neat. And there was a little tease Sakurai did in there. For whatever reason, I don't know why he did it, but I was, like, once he was saying it, I was, like, dreading what he was saying. A bunch of other people were, like, excited about it. He was like, you know, there's no, like, alternate designs, because now we have, like, the new design for Zelda and Ganondorf. And I was like, oh god, please don't, no. Don't do new designs of Zelda and Ganondorf who I already have. And fortunately, he didn't show that off. That made me, I was like, oh, thank god. Phew. But anyway, that is the extent of the Min Arms Smash Brothers presentation. It was a good little video. There's no word on who the next fighter is going to be or when that's going to happen, but I'm sure it's going to be sooner than later here that we'll get news on it. Since again, we haven't had an update since June, and it's already August. I'm guessing we'll get something either later this month, if not in September, and you know what will be the happiest part about it? I'll be happy if I'm wrong! Ha ha ha! I guess all we have to do now is conclude this wonderful, amazing 5th episode of the COP, the Creative Outlet Podcast. All right, so that's been this long-awaited 5th episode. Again, I just want to apologize for how long this took to come out. Like, this is ridiculous. Between school being ridiculous and not basically giving me any time to finish episode 4 editing, and then trying to get the guest, my girly friend who you see in the Creative Outlet bonus from this, and now all the people who have to get infected with COVID-19 potentially along the way, thankfully testing negative, just causing the production on this to take so long. It's finally done. It's done. You're at the conclusion. Episode 5 is going to be over. It's been a great little, basically 2-hour experience. I really hope episode 6 can come out a lot sooner. But I'm going to have a lot of editing on my plate here with just making this full, complete podcast edited in video form, and then making all the segments from it, and then doing the bonus, and I don't know. It's going to be a fun time. Please, if you can, do any sort of typical engagement thing you can, be that a like, a subscription, a comment, any feedback is always appreciated depending on your platform of choice. Yeah, I guess that's all I have for you today on this fine August 12th. I look forward to seeing everyone in episode 6. This is Brandon Pudwill, officially 20 years old as of yesterday on good old August 11th. Signing out. Thank you very much.